You mentioned that these things are not always easy and you will get opposition. At the moment in this country, you've read the papers over this weekend, a depressing level of debate. I just wonder how much scepticism there is. Do you have similar arguments around, fracking is going to solve all our problems, we don't need to worry about all this stuff? Do you face that in Austria, or?
When we started out back in 1993, 94, we had very difficult time. Nowadays it's a lot easier because nobody can brush aside the problems we see. We see it in the mountains, we see the melting glaciers, and we see that the mountains start disintegrating. This is something very, very disturbing. And on the other hand, you have a new generation, as I call it, who has a better understanding of what's going on in the world. So today, it's a lot easier. When I started out, it was, I said, blood, sweat, and tears. But you still run into heavy opposition on the part of the big power companies. And the devastating aspect in our country is that many politicians are involved in power companies and draw money from there. And nobody will ask them or can ask them to be a foe of his money. So this is, and I listen very closely to Gary. Of course, this is the main obstacle in the big movements, the bold movements in our country, the mixture of politics and of economy. So I'm fascinated by what he did, because he threw a snowball and it turned into an avalanche of goodwill and commitment. Great. Still, I like politicians too. But you see, this is the most fearsome and the most awesome aspect in our endeavor, that you have always politicians mingled with great or big power companies. So this is the talk, and this is the battle we are fighting in Austria. But it's a lot easier today, and thanks heaven, because many communities have been following suit.
Gary. You mentioned about fracking, which I think has got a real dilemma for everyone. Because Cheshire, where we are, is a fracking zone. The problem with fracking at the moment is that the Americans use it so much that we're importing all the coal, and we're using more coal because it's cheaper. So that's one dilemma caused by fracking. The other one is that it seems to me like the government's decided to, whether we agree or not, the government's going to put it through. So I think what we should do with fracking, if we're going to use it at all, is to all the more profit we make from fracking should be reinvested in renewables. So give us that time window, because renewables aren't going to generate sufficient energy, but we could use the investment. So I think the fracking debate is I really don't like it, because it's sort of making people think, we don't need to bother with renewables anymore, we've got fracking. And I still don't understand why there's such a negative debate about climate change in the UK. And it frustrates me no end to see people just not investing in the earth really reliably for next generations.
Okay, second question there.
Please, can one of you describe to me what 5 kilowatt hours of power will actually do? I'm sure I'm the only person in the room who doesn't know. So, your houses are capped at 5 kilowatt hours of power. So what can you do with that? Because I had to text my husband this morning to say how much do we use, and he thinks it's 20.
Yeah. No, that's 20 is what you're allowed. In other words, if you use in excess of 20 kilowatt hours at any one time, you'll blow your main fuse. On your supply. So your supply, everybody's electricity supply has a cap. It's just that and mostly it can be 15, 20, 25 kilowatts on most domestic properties, and obviously it's higher on businesses. I mean, our reason originally for applying a cap initially, the initial thought was to protect the system, so that you wouldn't have people using lots of large appliances and bringing it down. But if you look at all the equipment that you have in your house, let's take a washing machine. Now, a washing machine is nominally rated at 3 kilowatts. Yes? So obviously if you're running your washing machine, it would appear that you don't have much power in hand. But what you find is if you actually look through the cycle on your washing machine, the way you can do it is with the way that we equipped everybody on Egg, which was with these owl meters, where they're quite cheap, under £30, and you can read what you're using. What you'll find with the washing machine is it will use 3 kilowatts for about the first 20 minutes of its cycle when it's heating the water. That's all. The rest of the time it runs at under a kilowatt. If you find you can economise on the equipment, you can cut the size of your kettle down. You don't have to have a 3 kilowatt kettle. At home we use a 600 watt kettle. We cut down the capacity of our appliances, but what you actually find is that you can do everything. We can do everything at home that you can do on the mainland with 5 kilowatts, so you can't do it all at once. What you can't do is have your washing machine on, your dishwasher on, be hoovering and leave every television in the house on and the computers. You can do that with your 20-25 kilowatt allowance, but not with a 5. So all that happens then is you can do it, but you do it in succession. So you say you have the washing machine on, then you have something else on, something else on. So it spreads the load that's being applied to our system and helps the system. And if you're not having everything on at once, it encourages you to turn things off and not waste them.
Was it Egg that was on the news when you had to ask the landlady, the bed breakfast people, not to use the toasters for a while until you got the photovoltaic cells?
Do you know
going?
that story? we'd entered the Ashton Awards, and we were going down to the awards ceremony. In the event we did win, we actually won the gold award at the Ashton Awards. But we were down at the ceremony, and there's this story on the news. Basically the fabled Isle of Egg electricity scheme is no longer able to run anybody's toaster, and they're being told to turn it off. And it was a total press distortion. Yeah. It was nothing to do. What we do is we have the red and green card system that John was. Now we have like a traffic light. If there is ample renewable power, there's a green light down at the pier facilities. If the power is in shortish supply of renewable power, there's a red light. But the truth is that the amount of power available on the island is always the same, which is what the island is using. Because if the renewables aren't doing it, then the generator is providing it. The only thing is, generators are expensive to run, they use fuel, they stick CO2 into the atmosphere. So all we do is we say to people, worry not when the green light is on, but if the red light is on, if you would be a bit careful in your usage of the power. Nobody has to be, it's just a request. And I can actually produce figures that show that electricity consumption drops by about 20% on the island in this circumstance. So people do respond, but it's entirely voluntary. Nobody's told to do anything.
Peter, you had one sentence?
Just one sentence. Our technicians told me, if you put up 4 kilowatt of photovoltaic panels on your roof, they will produce about 4,000 kilowatt hours a year. So I don't know how you measure your electricity. We measure it in kilowatt hours. So 4 kilowatt of photovoltaic on the roof will produce 4,000 kilowatt hours for you a year.
John?
Yep, just briefly on the capping to 5 kilowatt hours, I mentioned there's a reconnection charge of £25, and we spoke about the owl meter. So people set an alarm on the owl meters, and John reminded me after I finished speaking that over the past 6 years there's only been half a dozen instances when anyone has had to be reconnected. We don't want so
we've never charged anybody either for
no.
that matter.
But
That's another thing, and the amount varies in the press from time to time. You know, the original intention was to charge people £10 after about a 3-month period in which if people cut themselves off, we would advise them, etc. And the island, the school children did a project on how much electricity does this and this bit of equipment consume. And the idea was that after 3 months, then people would have to pay for the egg electric technician going out to turn you back on. But it's happened so rarely.
Yeah. Settle down.
Maybe a couple of times a year, so we don't charge.
Sorry, can we just clarify terminology here, because we're using kilowatts and kilowatt hours. Is it a 5 kilowatt maximum load, or is it 5 kilowatt hours over the course of a day? I think that's where the confusion's coming in.
If you take the equivalent, what would be amount to 5 kilowatts, which in other words, if you exceed basically 20 amps in your current, then your power will trip off.
Is the cap on kilowatt hours per day?
No. It's on the instantaneous thing of taking more than 20 amps current. But we also have switches. The switches that trip off are type C rather than type B. So they allow for spikes in induction motors and so on in fridges.
Okay, questions about that?
Hi, Ross Weddle. Thanks very much for the presentation. They cover, I met an amazing range of activities, but one of the reasons I'm here is to try and find out what the next steps are. Do you each have possibly one thing that you would like to do or you would like to see done next?
So one next step each then, gents.
A greater awareness across the country in self-discipline and reduce usage. I think that's the answer. You know, we've got all. Do we need all these lights on in this room?
You can open those gates.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
So it's self-discipline.
1 point from Queen to then. One next step.
The professor said you should open the curtain so we don't have to switch on the
Yeah,
light.
that's right, yeah.
There's one thing, of course, we want to encourage people to, and that is put up photovoltaic or wind turbines and produce as much energy as you need for your home yourself. Of course, while being connected to the grid, because if you produce less, you have to draw from the grid, and if you produce more, you will deliver to the grid. Every house should become its own power station.
If I just speak in a sense for the egg electric side, then our aim would be to eliminate the generator entirely. We do, on average, 85% at the moment. We'd like to do 100%, and we're pursuing that.
Okay. I think for us, we've gone from one project which has kicked off the community's changing attitude to now thinking as a sustainable community. So our next step will be the Sustainable Development Company, which has intrinsically got its own power station where all the houses are supported, but also it's linked to older people's accommodation. So for us, it's thinking about sustainability rather than about energy saving, but the energy saving just kicked off the whole philosophy, I think.
this question concerns how a community would approach the university to get involved with a project. Peter and Gary seem to come in at different stages, and I wonder if perhaps a Newcastle University representative would sort of give an idea of at what stage does the community have to have a vision that strikes the university that these people it's worthwhile getting involved with this, or does Gary seem to come in at an early stage and there's all that our community wants is to become carbon neutral, and Chester University's.
I just say we came in at an early stage because as a scientist myself, I didn't want to do a project where I couldn't at the end work out what the impact had been. But I also felt the university would give us an independent view. It wouldn't be us measuring, the university's measuring. It has that peer-reviewed element to it. So that's why I approached the university. And to be honest, the university was falling over itself to help us because they saw it as a really good thing for MSc theses and things like that. We've had loads and loads. In fact, we've been overstudied really. So I would say the university, to us, the university's help has been absolutely critical, and it's common on other projects where universities get involved, they're more successful.
Could I answer that in part as well, from our own point of view, where the help is perhaps financially a little less extensive, but nonetheless is valuable. And ours came post completion of the project. We have an arrangement that's been very, very happy with Dundee University. They use us as part of their MSc Renewables course. So they do 2 days on the island where I give them a talk and then we have a tour and this sort of thing. And a lot of them do their projects on our electricity system. We make all the data available to them. We make it available to anybody who wants it. So we make all the data available on the system. And actually, it's a reciprocal thing. I mean, they benefit, but we also benefit. We benefit from their minds and their enthusiasm, but we also benefit. We benefited from some of the projects they have suggested, even some that we may not have the money to put into effect, but we can see would benefit us if we had the money. So it's a really reciprocal thing, and we try. We hope to build up more of these relationships with other academic institutions, universities.
Simon will just say something from a NIRA's point of view, from the Newcastle University Sustainability Institute representative.
Yes, I don't wish to talk about the whole of NIRA's because a lot of my colleagues come from sort of science engineering background and I'm a social scientist. But what I can say is that similar things are happening here as well. I know for a fact that some of our colleagues are centrally involved in Newcastle City Council's work on the Green Deal and the retrofitting of houses and people do similar, they have access to these 200 sort of houses that are being retrofitted, taking measures, providing baselines, monitoring later on. But I'm also sure, and I know that colleagues who have the expertise about the technology are also kind of providing advice and monitoring. I don't know all of the details of it, but similar things are happening with Newcastle, and this is what NIRA's would like to do. So I'm sure people will see a similar sort of open door here if they need advice and
I think one of the
collaboration.
things that NIRA's is taking on board more now is the notion of the demonstration project as well. And your projects are all very good demonstrations of how these things can work in practice and putting technologies and putting community involvement and putting change behaviours into practice. And I think this sort of notion of universities being involved, setting up demonstration projects with local communities, businesses and organisations
I should say something else, which is a major development in the city, and we call it Science Central. And one of the things which is Science Central in itself is going to be a major demonstration project for sustainability. Trying some of those technologies that we've been talking about today is part of that mission, and it's a collaboration between the university and the city.
I think one thing universities could do more of, is what John mentioned, which is in addition to the renewables and the energy, the actual social return on investment through this cohesion, through this people talk together, through this development of social enterprise. I work quite a lot with DEC on community energy, and the Treasury wants evidence to show that community energy projects could have extra finance if they will deliver additional benefits. But they're saying, can you quantify these additional benefits? And it's very difficult to do, but I think it's exactly what universities should be looking at.
We have a specialist in our business school, Jane Gibbon, she's an accountant. Her speciality is social enterprise.
Yeah.
She works up with one of our local social enterprises, the Jesmond Swimming Pool, which now works at a profit, and through help from her and other colleagues' input. So,
hi, I was just curious about the Yake project. Do you use electrical heat on the island, or do you import oil in it? So, have you looked into?
I think it's important to remember that we're talking about the 5 kilowatt hours here. So people do import oil. There's bottled gas. There's coal as well. I mean, we've not been able to steer away from these things, but we've been able to move people away. Particularly solar water heating has probably been the biggest change.
We don't apply what people do with their electricity up to their limit is entirely up to them. And to a degree, some people do use electrical heating. And, you know.
Hi, thank you very much for your presentations. I feel completely motivated and inspired. My name's Alton, and I'm at the very early stages of trying to set up a community renewable scheme in my rural parish of Newton and Bywell in Northumberland. And when I say I'm at the early stages, it really is. It just at the moment it's been about galvanising community interest and getting people inspired. And there's definitely a will, but the sticking point is the money, I have to say. And that's one thing that I just like to pick your brains on, really. I'm just starting out on this, and I can see that there are various places you can go for the finance. You can try for grants, which seem to be diminishing. You can go for loans, and that really depends on the appetite of the community for taking on that liability. You can look to investors who will look for a return, or you can ask people to put their hands in their own pockets. And I know that crowdfunding is increasing all the time. So I just wonder, from your experience, if you can give me a flavour of where to channel our energies and what to expect.
Well, ours, in a sense, came from all the locations. We had funders, yes, the European Regional Development Fund and the big lottery were major funders. If you took the funding in order, they would be the first two, but number three would be the Isle of Egg. On the work that we did for nothing on the project, which all had value, on the amount that the people on Egg paid to be connected to the electricity system, on the amount that the Trust has contributed and the Residents Association to the work that's been done since the project came in. And of course we also took out a bank loan for part of the project as well, which we are repaying. So it was everything. We simply sought initial funding to be able to build the project, and then we have sort of contributed as was necessary over the course of time. But certainly the third contributor, and probably if one totaled it up, we would have contributed about a third of the total value of the scheme ourselves, one way or another.
We can speak afterwards, we'll let you know.
I was just going to mention that if you want some examples, if you look at people like Bath and West Community Energy, they've just done a share offer for a large ground-based solar panel, community solar panel farm. They were hoping to raise 600,000 from a local share offer, and they were oversubscribed to 850,000. So, in fact, they don't want to take the money because they want to take a loan in addition, because they want to prove they can pay back a loan for their on-track record. But you'll see people like Abundance Generation, which specialises in helping community. They're FSA regulated, and they specialise in helping you do share offers. There's a whole bunch of this finance area is really critical, and it's one that's becoming a bit easier. But communities still find it difficult to borrow money, but there are moves afoot to make it easier. I would suggest looking at a local share offer if you've got a decent project.
Yeah.
Think about it.
Well, that's good to know. Thank you.
Okay, so two last questions. There's one over there and one at the back.
I was just wondering if you could hear a little more about what the youth involvement has been. So, have young people been interested in what have their opportunities been, and perhaps how they've been represented on your committees?
Well, I start that off. It's I'll speak up a bit because I could hardly hear you, so you probably can't hear me. I think a bit of leadership was required here, and I mean one of the big successes in Egg, I mentioned how the population had gone up from 63 to 98 or so, has been the number of people returning to the island, young people who had left, who are now coming back. So we're actually seeing a generational shift now, and we're seeing some of the next generation, the ones let's say under 35 probably, John, coming now to join the board and to run the projects and to take things forward. And that wasn't there before. And those people just simply wouldn't have returned to the island without a stable electricity scheme and prospects of employment. There are a couple of young lads who are doing a web-based design, it's a web design-based business on the island. So I think the leadership by the older community has brought the younger community in. So we've not quite reached the stage of kind of heaving a big sigh of relief, but but the next generation are starting to take up positions. It's been really encouraging. Yeah.
In fact, just to amplify that, 2 of the present 4 island directors are under 35.
Yeah.
Half of the maintenance team of Egg Electric is under 35. Officers on the Residents Association, likewise, the secretary is under 30. So, and increasingly the younger people are playing a part.
I think of youth as teenagers, actually. You know, we got involved with the primary school. The teenagers are quite a difficult group to get engaged because they've got other things to worry about, you know, like dating or playing games on and stuff. So, but what we found was video making was a really good way to engage teenagers. We've had several who've made videos of the project with their own cameras and they've been putting them on the skateboards and doing, you know, through the village doing things. And also we found out having the TV companies, when the TV companies came, like the BBC, we said you can come, but you've got to let the kids go inside the truck. So we had trucks full of teenagers just twiddling knobs. The BBC loved it anyway. And that was what got them talking and got them into the project. So in different ways, I think you have to address youth different ways. For example, we only filmed outside the pub at 3:15 in the afternoon because we knew that was the time the coach from the school arrived and dumped all the kids off it. And they could see the cameras and they all joined in with the interviews there. It's quite difficult, but we did manage it quite well.
Peter?
Yeah. One of the most important things we started right out from the very beginning, we invited school classes. We provided guided lines through our plants. Primary school, elementary school, secondary grammar, up to high schools. So this must be part of your local schedule at schools. Children have to grow up with the idea we can substitute fossil fuels by renewable energy. And remember one thing, you can run into troubles too when children start to ask questions at home.
Yes.
But this is part of our system. Schools must be at the plants, must look at them, must learn from them, and this is part of what they hear and what they experience at school. So this is a learning process from the very beginning. Even kindergarten from 3 years up will go and look at the plants and will tell their parents, who may still be skeptical, what wonderful stuff we have in that little town. It's a process of education, as I mentioned before.
We had, you've got to watch this because we had a switch off program for the young children. And one day we got an email from a family saying the child had gone into a room, switched all the lights off and left grandma for 3 hours in the dark. So you've got to be careful.
Final question from the back there.
Chris McLeod, Energy and Community Trust. We're trying to set up generating green energy within a small parish area up in Northumberland. We're very limited as to how much we can harness because of the national grid lines, which apparently there are a couple of lines, they're only 100 kilowatt that they will take. So I think you were going to talk a little bit about microgrid survey. I'm not an electrician, I'm not quite sure if that covers that sort of development of access. And also on A, there's the development of the grid there. That was the limitations that and frustrations we've had in trying to kick off the whole development.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The great thing about the microgrid is that you generate your own energy from your own decentralized plant and you put it into your own network, and people like on the Isle of Egg use it directly, so you get a much better deal than you do selling it back to the grid.
But of course we have no connection to the mainland,
No.
so what we've got is all there is.
Yeah. But in Ashton we were very fortunate having such a good DNO, the network operator, allowing us to use the lines, because technically they could charge us for putting power down those lines, but they didn't want to. And I think microgrids are a good way to go, and I think the Isle of Egg is a classic example of how you educate the population to use energy when it's available. So we would have really liked to have done that, and we've done a lot of work on it. We've got a model for how a community goes about doing that if you'd like to have it. It cost us £100,000, well, government grant. We did a lot of work, and it was designed for any community that wants to look at using the microgrid. So you're very welcome to have that.
That's interesting.
Okay, so I think there'll be maybe a bit more justice to chat with our guests over lunch now. A couple of small announcements before then.